On the other side of the country, in New Jersey, we had a significant development as well. What happened there?
Yeah, so we finally have our second state to pass a quote-unquote Bruin response bill, basically a state that was formerly may issue, that was affected by the Supreme Court's ruling in New York State Rifle and Pistol Association v. Bruin, striking down basically subjective carry laws that didn't allow the issuing of permits on objective grounds.
May issue laws is what we call them, right?
Right. And so obviously New York was at hand in that case, and they responded pretty quickly with their wide-ranging, sweeping, restricting concealed carry law that's been in and out of courts for the last few months that we've been covering. But up until this point, no other states had joined them in that pursuit.
Right.
Until
California
yesterday.
tried, but couldn't quite get across the line.
Yeah, they got too aggressive and tried to pass a special immediate emergency bill, and it cost them. But now we have New Jersey actually officially, the legislature at least, has officially passed a Bruin response bill. As of recording this podcast, Governor Phil Murphy has yet to sign the bill into law, but we all expect that he's going to do so. And it's pretty similar to the New York law. I think there's over 20 quote unquote sensitive places where even licensed carry will be illegal. There's a whole bunch of new background checks. You have to get extra references that can't be family members. You have to have people that can speak to your character during the application process. They upped the application fees to $200 just to apply, plus an additional, I believe, $50 to have your permit issued. So a total of $250 just for the application portion. They added a bunch of training requirements to include both in-person classroom training and live fire range training. And probably one of the bigger, more controversial additions that isn't in the New York law is the requirement for insurance. For if you want to carry in public, they say you have to have minimum liability insurance, a policy that covers up to $300,000 in quote unquote injury and death, which is a little interesting because it creates a sort of
whose injury and death. I mean, like, are you trying to cover people for criminal acts?
Right.
Because obviously you
That's
can't
the
do
hang-up.
that.
Yeah.
This is the same sort of idea that we've covered in the past with, was it San Jose?
Yep, that's right.
Out in California, that is trying to require insurance for gun ownership. I mean, honestly, none of these things seem very long for this world in the wake of Bruin. They also have the private property
That's right.
ban as well. Basically it applies to public accessible private property. So things like stores or restaurants. In the entire history of the country, in every state up to this point, the rule had been that private property owners can ban people from carrying on their property if they so choose to, but they have to post a sign to let people know that they're doing that. And so New York's and New Jersey's innovation here is just to flip the whole thing on its head. It's illegal. Not only is it off limits, it's a felony,
right,
to carry on private property unless it's posted that you can. So, most of these controversial provisions that New Jersey has now passed into law were already been struck down by judges in New York. They are all enforced right now in New York because the Second Circuit is waiting to hear an appeal to those decisions. But 3 different federal judges in New York, I believe, or is 3 different judges, if I'm remembering that correctly. It's either 2 or 3. There's several cases, and it's like 3 or 4 cases, but have struck down a bunch of different portions of New York's law. It does feel like they just want to get right back to the Supreme Court to lose again. There's some of this stuff you can argue over. It's a novel approach, so maybe there's some room for error here or some possibility that these things hold up. But so much of this is just a direct sort of middle finger to the Supreme Court, to be honest with you. Yeah. It just doesn't seem like there's a lot of actual wiggle room in any of this stuff, because it's just trying to go directly against what the court ruled in Bruin. And I don't see how it doesn't just end up back at the Supreme Court for another sort of round of getting these laws struck down. Unless it just doesn't make it that far.
Right.
Like they could lose at the lower courts, which have been fairly faithful to the Bruen decision in reviewing these specific laws so far. But yeah, it's kind of shocking in a certain way. We've talked about this before with New York, but I think my analysis piece at one point was called "Thank you, sir. May I have another?" Right? That's what New York is telling the court. It's like they want to have these laws struck down because they're just so blatantly against what the court had ruled, especially stuff like the private property ban or the sensitive places expansions to be almost everywhere. Right? It's like it's harder to legally carry a gun in New York now than it was before the Bruen rule.
Right.
And I don't know who thinks that's going to hold up. You know what I mean? Like it's one thing to say, well, maybe some of these other laws unrelated to gun carry will stand, like a permit to purchase law in the Oregon ballot initiative, right? Like it's sort of like a shall issue gun carry law. So maybe that'll be acceptable. Even if it doesn't have a historical analog because of, the way that Kavanaugh and Roberts had approved of shall issue permitting regimes and Bruins in the concurrence. And you can get into this stuff about, all right, well, how far is this going to go? What laws are going to be found to have historical analogs? But these carry laws in New Jersey and New York, and probably in California next year sometime, are gonna, it's just, there's not really much room to have some sort of nuanced conversation about them. They are just kind of the exact things that Bruen said you can't do.
And you sort of saw this with some of the lawmaker deliberation while this bill was being debated, because this was like a 2-month process in New Jersey. But you heard, time and time again from Democratic lawmakers that were supporting this bill saying, well, we know that I'm sure there's going to be a ton of legal challenges as soon as we pass this. And, we're going right at the Supreme Court. And it seems like they're well aware that this is just inviting, a new onslaught of challenges that they're probably going to lose, but they just do it anyway.
It's very odd. It does remind me, I will say, of how some cities operate in, red states or purple states. Philadelphia comes to mind, obviously, where they're sort of constantly passing gun restrictions that are not legal under state law and constantly losing in court. They do this basically a couple times a year, actually, usually, and they seem unperturbed by the fact that they're always losing. They seem to know that they can't do this stuff, and they just do it anyway. And the only reason, why you would go about that is if it were politically popular, or at least not politically unpopular, I guess.
Yeah.
And so I get, it's probably not that unpopular for New York and New Jersey lawmakers to give a middle finger to the Supreme Court on this issue, because in their states, while there are millions of gun owners in both states, it's they're very deep blue states that just, I don't know, I guess they like the idea of fighting the court on this issue or what have you, but it's these don't strike me as serious attempts to respond to the ruling. They just strike me as things that are, I guess, political messaging at the cost of a lot of taxpayer money and time for those affected by the laws. So I don't know. We'll see how it plays out. Maybe I'm wrong, right? Maybe the court gets bored and doesn't go back to this issue or something. That's like the only hope I could see for these laws surviving very long, is just the court kind of goes back into its 10-year hibernation on gun issues and just never takes up a case like this. But I don't know. I could see these laws turning out just like Sertano did in 2016, where it was just a 2-page opinion where they're like, this is obviously against what we had ruled. Right. You can't do this. And it was unanimous. Like that wouldn't shock me. So we'll see. We'll have to, of course, keep an eye on how these things develop. But in the meantime, of course, this is going to affect people who live in New Jersey and want to carry a firearm. Unfortunately, for those of you who are in that position, you will probably win out in the end, but it's probably going to take a while.